today we are finishing Samson. So have a clean break. And then when we come back on January 2nd, we are going to start fresh with a whole new story. Okay, so we got to, where are we? Here we go. Okay, so we got to chapter 16, and I want to pick up with verse 15. What we've had until now, we saw, first of all, we discussed Samson has this real weakness for women. There are 3 different women that he is taken by one way or another. And this one, Delilah, of course, is going to be his undoing. And we already see that he's with her and that she is being already put up to it by the Philistines, who have told her to please, do whatever she can to get the secret of his strength out of him. So that they'll of course promise to pay her money, and she works very hard, and she's pleading with him and asking him, and 3 different times he gives her a story. The 3rd time he comes very close to the hair, except he doesn't say cutting off his hair. He says, if you weave 7 locks of my head into a web, and then she pinned it with a peg, etc. And so she tried that, and it didn't work. And so she realizes at that point, 3 different times, he's told her a story. And then verse 15, then she said to him, how can you say you love me when you don't confide in me? This makes 3 times that you've deceived me and haven't told me what makes you so strong. Finally, after she had nagged him and pressed him constantly, he was wearied to death, and he confided everything to her. Now, what exactly does he say? He said to her, no razor has ever touched my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God since I was in my mother's womb. If my hair were cut, my strength would leave me, and I should become weak. I should become as weak as an ordinary man. Now, until the point of I've been a Nazarite to God since I was in my mother's womb. Until that point, we know that story. Okay, we know that the angel appeared to his parents and told them that he needed to be a Nazarite, a unique kind of Nazarite, as we discussed when we studied those verses, and that he cannot cut his hair at all. He is a Nazarite to God. And a Nazarite to God is, of course, someone who takes some kind of an oath and dedicates certain rules. And the main idea of this is that he's separating himself from certain things. In the case of Samson, from wine, from cutting his hair. Both of these are classic Nazarite things, but there's parts, also Nazarites are not supposed to have any come close to death or dead bodies in every way. And then, of course, Samson is the opposite because he goes around killing a lot of people. But there is this idea, though, of a separation, that a person takes an oath of his Nazarite to dedicate self to God, to be a little bit ascetic in a way, at least for a time, so that he can repair his relationship with God, that he can start on a new path. It is definitely coming from that place. Samson, of course, wasn't given the choice. He was assigned this status since before he was born. But in the last part of this verse, if my hair were cut, my strength would leave me. This is not something we have ever seen. This is not part of what the angel said to him or what his parents said to him. We have no information before now that there's something technical about his growing his hair, that if his hair would be cut, he would lose his strength. So the question that I'm going to pose now as we continue reading this, is there something magical about his hair being cut? Or is there something else going on here? Okay, and that's what I would like to pursue here. Continuing with the story, sensing that he had confided everything to her, Delilah sent for the lords of the Philistines with this message, come up once more, for that he has confided everything to me. And the lords of the Philistines came up and brought the money with them. She lulled him to sleep on her lap. Then she called in a man, and she had him cut off the 7 locks of his head. Then she weakened him. Now here I would I take issue with this translation, weakened, because in Hebrew it says she began to torture him or to persecute him. The word is la'anoto, to persecute him. And here my translation weakened him. It's really not the same. his strength slipped away from him. Okay, she cried, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Now, seemingly, she is put him to bed. She has put, and look at this verse, on her lap. Okay, so you have this sense of she's creating a relationship with Samson. She has, on the one hand, begged him and pleaded with him and needled him and driven him literally insane in order to get the secret out of him. And yet there's some level of, she's one clever woman, so she then kind of balances that. Okay, honey, come on now, have a sleep, lie down on me. And she kind of rocks him to sleep on her lap. So there's a real intimacy there, but also you get the sense that she's completely manipulative. She's manipulating her badgering, and then she's manipulating her more intimate caressing, all for the same purpose. She wants to get her money from the Philistines. And so then they come in and they cut his hair, and it says he's lost his strength. But then you have this Philistine saying, okay, Samson, she says, the way she did all three times, whatever would happen. And then she would yell out, "Samson, the Philistines are here," thinking that, he would not be able to whatever. And indeed, she saw that it was all a lie because he was able to bring himself out of his chains. So in this case, she tries it again. Philistines are here. And he wakes up, which is, I think, very interesting, because the whole time they're cutting his hair, he's still sleeping. I asked myself, when in addition to putting his head on her lap, did she feed him some kind of a sleep potion? I have no idea, but she certainly was succeeding in getting him into a very deep, relaxed sleep so that they could be cutting his hair and he doesn't even know it, okay, until he wakes up. They wake him up. He wakes up from his sleep, and then he says, he woke from his sleep, and he says, "I will come out of this as always. Okay, I will get out of this," thinking, okay, he would break loose, but he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And I want you to notice here, it doesn't say he did not know that God leaves him because he had no hair. Okay, it says he did not know that the Lord departed from him. Now, I would assume, although I may, you could see this otherwise, he's had his hair cut. They say, "Wake up." He wakes up. Okay. He sees that the Philistines are on top of him, right? Doesn't he realize at that point he has no hair? He must. I mean, he's got this heavy head of hair. He wakes up. He has to know his hair is gone. So if he knows his hair is gone, how come it says he doesn't know that God has left him? Now, there are different interpretations. One interpretation is, well, he was kind of groggy, so he didn't really know his hair was gone. Or you could say, well, he knew his hair was gone, but he still hoped that maybe despite his hair, God would be with him, okay? I'm questioning whether this relationship that he presents to Delilah about hair equals strength, no hair equals no strength, if it indeed was as technical and seemingly magical as he laid it out to be. And then maybe he himself knew that that really wasn't it. Okay, it wasn't a technical issue. Of course, we have to figure out what it was. Continuing. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza, shackled him in bronze fetters, and he became a mill slave in the prison. So clearly, he has no hair, he has no strength. But as I seem to indicate, I'm not sure. I think we kind of diminish the story, and we certainly diminish God and the way he works by saying there's something magical about hair. And if he cuts off his hair, he suddenly has no strength. I'd like to go back to the whole original part of his being a Nazarite. Okay, if you go back to chapter 13, in the first time that the angel appears, verse 5, "For you are going to conceive and bear a son. Let no razor touch his head, for the boy is to be a Nazarite to God from the womb on. He shall be the first to deliver Israel from the Philistines." Or not really the first. He shall begin. Again, I don't like this translation. He shall begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. To me, the commandment not to for the razor, not to let no razor touch his head, for the boys to be a Nazirite. The purpose of the long hair is because he is to be a Nazirite. He is not, the purpose of the long hair, it's not just that it's not mentioned that it's his strength, but the whole purpose of the long hair is that he shall be a Nazirite. Okay, that he shall have a holy purpose, that he needs to be set aside in some way. If we come back to our chapter where he talks about, when he tells her the story, what does he says? He says, very similar. He says, no razor has ever touched my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God. Okay, so I think he also understands that the key here is being a Nazirite. Now, why did he need to be a Nazirite? There's a very interesting interpretation as given by an ancient commentator, and I saw it also picked up by some more modern ones, that say the whole reason for being a Nazirite is because God already saw. On the one hand, Samson was going to be a man of unusual strength and unusual talents, but on the other hand, God already knew and saw that he had a weakness for women, that he had a problem with his sexual urges, and that was going to be his weakness, and gave him the commandment of the Nazirite as a way of protecting him. Because the idea is, if you can set some kind of a fence around you, if you create a person with different kinds of rules, that helps you set a distance, that helps you say, well, I'm not going to go and gather with all the guys. Okay, I'm not going to go after all the girls. You know, I'm going to be a little bit different. I'm going to stand apart. That was the whole purpose of the Nazirite, not to put strength in his hair, but that his whole being, which is part of it is his long hair, but his whole being is to be something different. And God gave him this extra armor, so to speak, to help him resist his sexual urges. Okay, and he failed. He failed. And in fact, there is a very interesting saying in the Talmud discussing Samson. And it says, we see here, when the Philistines captured him, one of the first things they do is they take out his eyes. You know, it's very barbaric. You know, they blind him, they take out his eyes. And the statement in the Talmud said, because he sinned with his eyes, that God punishes him through his eyes. And if you'll notice, the 3 times that we deal with his women, okay, so at the beginning of chapter 14, verse 1, it says, Samson went down to Timnah, and while in Timnah, he saw a girl among the Philistine women. So that's woman number 1. Woman number 2 is in, where is it? Here we go, in chapter 16. Again, Samson went to Gaza. There he saw a prostitute and he slept with her. Okay, so again, and then we have here Delilah. He also, okay, it says here he loved her, but I think there's also some place where he said that she, I don't remember where, maybe it doesn't. But there is this idea that he saw these women, and it were these women that he saw them with his eyes, they attracted him, and therefore he had his eyes taken out. I think that's all part of the same thing. This is Samson's weakness, and this is where, whether it's God preparing initially to give him some kind of guardrails, so to speak, against this, but this is certainly what happens. This is clearly his weakness. So what really is going on here? I would like to suggest as follows. When he told her that if he will have his hair cut, he will no longer have power, it could be that's what he assumed. It could be he took a technical interpretation of it. I'm not sure though. Okay, it could be also that he was telling her something that was half truth and half lie. In other words, this idea, if you cut my hair, it'll take out my strength. He was getting closer to who he was. He did reveal himself to her in a way he'd never had before, by revealing the fact that he's a Nazirite, that he's a holy man, that he has a holy purpose here. Okay, that was kind of giving away that he may be an agent of the Israelites or an agent of God, and not so much being like all the Philistines. But I'm wondering if he really believed himself, because when he says, as I mentioned, he wakes up, he had to have known he had no hair. If he thought that he still had strength, then he clearly did not connect the cutting of the hair in such a technical way. And yet we see, and I think this is the most important thing, what does the verse say in verse 20? He did not know that God or the Lord had departed from him. This is the key. All along, we read that God is with him, that God has put his spirit upon him. And here, God takes away his spirit from him. And that's why he loses his strength. And the question is, why does God take his spirit away from him? And I think in the relationship between Delilah and Samson, we see exactly Samson's weakness, but we see also how he essentially gives up on his Nazariteness. It's not just that he tells her what he is as a Nazarite and kind of shares something that he probably shouldn't have shared. But then again, we never see before that God said, this is a secret. Don't tell anybody that you're a Nazarite. No, it doesn't say that anywhere. But I think in capitulating to Delilah, what is essentially happening is he is right here between two things. On the one hand, there's the wiles of the women. There's Delilah, there's all her pleading and all the manipulation she's doing to him. And he's extremely weak. I mean, it says he's wearied to death. She has the ability to plague him in that way because he has such a weakness for women and has such a weakness, especially for manipulative women. He doesn't know how to stand up in front of them. And yet there's someone else he's supposed to be standing up in front of. There's someone else who he's supposed to be listening to, and that's God. And it is God who has told him, you are a Nazarite. Don't cut your hair. Don't drink wine. And of course, God is expecting him to behave like a upstanding person and not let himself be cajoled and manipulated by a Delilah. And when he's standing at that moment, and at that moment capitulates and tells Delilah who he is, it is that moment in time that God removes himself from him. Because at that point, he understands by surrendering his Nazariteness in a way to Delilah, he has surrendered his devotion to God and replaced it with his giving in to the manipulations of Delilah. And that is the key. It's not a technical cutting his hair. It is that he had the protection of this Nazariteness, and he left it because he could not withstand the pressures and the cajolings of Delilah. And so from then on, of course, he's gone and he's taken, etc. And then we have, of course, his redemption at the end. The Philistines, verse 22, after his hair was cut off, it began to grow back. And again, is it technical? I would like to see this as symbolic. His hair growing back patterns or mirrors the change that happens within him, where he realizes he was here to save the nation of Israel from the Philistines. He had brilliant ideas of how to do it. He let himself go behind enemy lines, and he had all these ideas that really worked to kind of mingle with Philistine society, and by doing this, like a spy, use them at their most vulnerable to get them. And he was successful at that, okay? And of course, his amazing strength helped him. But once he goes with Delilah, he doesn't remember anymore that he has a mission to save the Jewish people. He's just giving in to her and her manipulations. There's absolutely nothing that is part of his plan there. He falls in love with Delilah. He doesn't use her. It's not a spy deal anymore. He falls in love with her. And at that point, he loses sight of his mission. His hair growing back is a symbol that he's returning to his original mission. And of course, they have this big party, and it's noted here, it's a pagan party. They gather to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon and to make merry. Okay, it's a pagan festival. So nothing like him being brought out in chains to a pagan festival reminds him this is not who he is. Okay, when the people saw him, they sang praises to their God, chanting, "Our God has delivered into our hands the enemy who devastated our land and who slew so many of us." And of course, nothing like this goes further to say he is seeing what we will call the classic desecration of God's name. They're using his humility, the fact that they've brought him down. He is blind, he is bound, he's a slave, he's in a wretched situation. And they're using that to say, our God Dagon has won. And of course, that is not something he can possibly tolerate in any way. He is still at heart a God-fearing man, a man who had a mission, a man who slipped because of his weakness for women, but he remains a God-fearing man when he remembers his original goal to save the people. As their spirits rode, they say, call Samson here, let him dance for us. Samson was fetched from the prison and he danced for them. Then they put him between the pillars. And of course, he then says to this boy standing by, he says, let me feel the pillars. And he positions them in such a way so he has one hand on each of the pillars. And what does he say? Now their temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and there were some 3,000 men and women on the roof watching Samson dance. Then Samson called to the Lord, and this is such a beautiful prayer. He calls out from his tremendous devastation. Oh, Lord God, please remember me and give me strength just this once, oh God, to take revenge of the Philistines, if only for one of my two eyes. He embraced the two metal pillars that the temple rested upon, one with his right arm, one with his left, and leaned against them. Samson cried, let me die with the Philistines. And he pulled with all his might. The temple came crashing down on the lords and on all the people in it. Those who were slain by him as he died outnumbered those who had been slain by him when he lived. Okay. And again, I would say he's calling to God. His hair has grown back. Okay. If this hair equals strength was this magic formula, he would assume he had strength, but he himself knows that the hair was just a symbol and that he has to call to God, asking him once again to give them that enormous strength just this one time. And he says, let me die with the Philistines. He doesn't care if he dies. He's in such a miserable situation anyway, but he's not committing suicide in the classic sense. He is not giving up or taking a life, which we all know is wrong. What he's doing is he understands in order to bring this roof down on these 3,000 people, the only way to do it is to also bring it down on himself. And he's willing to sacrifice himself so that he can kill all these people. And it's not just how many he's killed. It's the fact that he is correcting this terrible impression that they have that Dagon has defeated God. And so by calling upon God's strength and defeating these people and destroying them in such a way, he is creating the counter impression. He is enabling in his last words and his last act in his life, he is able to say, it is God who has the strength. It is God who has the power. He will give me this power so that I can end my life doing something to save the nation of Israel, which of course was what his original message, his original mission was to begin with. And of course, at the end, we end with a sense of closure. His brothers and all his father's household came down and carried him up and buried him in the tomb of his father Manoach between Sorah and Eshtaol. He had led Israel for 20 years. Now we said when we saw at the end of chapter 15, he led Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. We said it was exact same amount of time. So there was, two different kinds of summaries. At the end of chapter 15, things are still going his way. Of course, in the beginning of 16, he really does lose his way. And yet at the end, with this, he kind of redeems himself and redeems God's name and redeems the fact that he really slaughters so many Philistines. I'm sure it makes a tremendous impression, and he can come back to ending his life with that same, he ruled Israel, he judged Israel for 20 years. And the fact that his brothers and household come and they bring him back and he's buried in his father's or the family tomb, it's of course saying that he's reunited with his brothers, and that after all of these escapades, they realize, I'm sure, that he really was a judge of Israel. He was different. He didn't fulfill the usual roles, but he certainly acted as a savior for Israel during a terrible time when they were suffering from the Philistines. And with that, we conclude the story of Samson. And indeed, with that, we essentially conclude the story of all the judges that are referred to in the book of Judges. The last few chapters, chapters 17 through 21, 17 through 21 are two different stories that are very different from the rest of the book of Judges. We will begin discussing those next week. But at this point, we really can say we concluded the story of the judges themselves, the different enemies that are besieging Israel, how they deal with them, and the various saviors that God sends in order to help them. And we started out, the first one, well, we have the first one is Othniel, is just a pure man and just, is there saving and doing good things. Ehud is a marvel of a judge. Deborah and Barak, we have a real sense of God-fearing good people. They're not perfect, but they're certainly filling the role of judges. And they seem to be very upstanding, righteous people. Gideon, of course, is an amazing man, but at the end of his life, we see for the first time a real problem, because at the very end of his life, we learn that he creates this golden monument, or some kind of a somewhat pagan, or could be interpreted as pagan idea. And as a result of it, after his death, they begin to worship this, or even towards the end of his life. And of course, following Gideon, we have Abimelech, who is the absolute worst. He's a tyrant. He's a murderer, mass murderer. He's absolutely horrible. And then, of course, we have Jephthah, who is a combination character. Okay, he does some good things, but he's clearly from the beginning a very problematic character. And then we reach Samson, who is a tremendously, problematic character. So we can see now the movement from the real righteous judges, and as the book moves on, we start to deteriorate, and we meet people, even when they're doing good things, they are very problematic characters, and it just gets worse. And the worse, of course, we end up, with Samson. The last chapters are two stories that are horrific and are in many ways at the end of the book to tell us something about the entire period. A period that may have started with a lot of promise ends up being a period that is a mess with tremendous problems. So we will discuss that and what that all means beginning in 2 weeks. But this is an opportunity for you to open up your mics. And if you have any comments or questions about either about Samson or about all the judges we've done until now, this is the opportunity.
Yes,
Thank you so
much. Thank you so much for the lesson, Yashikoa. And the other thing about Samson, when he went to his parents, he said she was good in my eyes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. In my eyes.
So right. I loved how you show that his eyes was important in this whole
eyes lead him astray.
Yes. Right from the beginning, I mean, with Chava as well, it seemed good to her eyes. The eyes right from the beginning of Bereshit is
right.
The trap,
Adam and Eve, sure, yes. with the fruit.
Yes,
the fruit of the forbidden tree.
I think that is why
it seemed good to her. It seemed attractive to her.
That's why I think
there is something about
focus on the
wandering
air.
eyes.
We focus on the air.
Yes, there
when
is.
We go to the Sinai is heard, not so much see.
Wandering eyes.
Okay. Wandering eyes. Yes, Diane, you wanted to say something.
Yes. When it says in the last verse of chapter 16, his brethren and all the house of his father. So do we gather from that once the Lord opened his mother's womb with the birth of Samson, that she went on to have more children?
Yeah, I think someone raised that question like a week or two ago. Yeah, I think definitely we can say that. Although sometimes brothers can also mean, just part of the same family.
Yes, that's what I wondered.
Whatever. So it doesn't really go into it. So, but it is very possible. Oh. It's very possible.
Okay.
Anybody else have a comment or a question? Okay. Well, it's good to see you all.
Good to be
Today.
here
Good
with
to see you.
you.
Thank you very much.
And
Sondra,
have really a Merry Christmas to all of you. Most of you are Christian. I know there's a couple Jews. Ruchama. I'm not saying Merry Christmas to you.
Hatzameach.
Hag Sameach.
Most people are celebrating
Hanukkah.
Christmas. I just really, from the bottom of my heart, I want to wish you all a very joyous holiday. May you be surrounded by family and friends who you love, and may you find spiritual meaning in the holiday, despite the commercialism.
We block out the commercialism.
Yeah, good. That's something you need to do. And Ruchama, happy Hanukkah to you.
Happy
Hanukkah.
We'll see you
Happy
in 2 weeks.
Hanukkah. Yeah.
Thank
Happy
you.
Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Hag
See you in
Sameach.
2 weeks then. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ta-ta.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.